I was raised until 7th grade in Queens, New York, and then my family uprooted us. My father didn't want to wanted to have kids in a bad neighborhood, so he literally drove an hour and a half outside of New York and said, "This is where I can commute. I can commute this far," and moved us to a super rural, 5 acres, horses, farm type atmosphere in New Jersey. It was the perfect time because it was right when I was starting to think I was a man, you know what I mean? And I started fighting, and there were gangs, and I started becoming the tougher kid in the block just out of natural selection, not that I knew how to fight or anything. It was just, I didn't realize that, God kind of gave me a gift with my athleticism, so I just was tougher than some of the kids, and I started getting to the point where I was starting to be the tough kid in the block and starting to get in trouble, and then thank God I moved. Up until that point, I never played a sport in my life. I didn't know what sports were. It introduced me to things like football, things like wrestling, which brought me to where I ultimately am right now. I moved to a town called White Township in Belvedere, New Jersey, and I literally was the only black kid in school. So it was kind of like a big culture shock for me. My freshman year of high school, I was at a pool, and the football high school kids were there, and they were like, "Oh, why don't you go?" There's like football tryouts, and they were running 40-yard sprints, and I knew I was fast, so we ran a 40-yard sprint. I ran like a 4.58 40 when I was like a freshman, and everyone was like, "Oh, this kid's got to play football," and that's kind of how it took off. And then after that, my freshman year, I started to actually learn how to play the sport, and I had a very good freshman year. I ended up playing varsity as a freshman, and then that's when I found wrestling. And wrestling was a sport where they just told me, I was told to do it, basically. Like, this will help you for football. It really didn't help me with football. They just wanted me to wrestle. And my first year, I went 7-14. And it was pin or be pinned. That's what they called me. And I didn't know the sport. What happened was, I started progressing, started getting very good at football, and I ended up, being one of the top rushers like in New Jersey for the next 2 or 3 years. And then that's when I took up wrestling. And wrestling was another progression. I think it was 7-14 my freshman year. My second year, I was like 14-10. And then my third year, I started wrestling in the summertime. And all of a sudden, I started to learn technique, and it changed the world up for me. And my junior year, I made it to the States. My senior year, I took a second, and I took a third in the country. I realized that me not playing sports was going to end if I didn't go to college. So I busted my butt to get my SAT scores up at the time and do what I had to do to get to school. So I went to Blair for a year. There, I won the national preps there, and then we went undefeated in football. And then I made the decision on what I wanted to do, and I didn't know what to do. I was in a weird situation because I was almost Prop 48, but I had good grades. I didn't have enough college prep courses at the time. But I was a good student. Somehow I got into Colgate University. I love football, and I decided to, just play football instead. And when I was done, I was working in corporate America, doing a corporate grind, and I just had the buzz to want to do something again. And I was just tired of lifting weights. I was tired. It was like literally like the movies where when I would go to work and it was like hundreds, thousands of people walking, and I'm like, am I just another number, And I started doing Muay Thai at a Muay Thai school, Anderson's Martial Arts. And, thank God I didn't stay there. So I was there, and they introduced me to Jiu Jitsu. And I didn't know anything about Jiu Jitsu, but I just knew that I could wrestle. No matter what, I could wrestle. Even when I was in high school, you put me against an All-American in college, I'm going to go after him, And we started doing jiu-jitsu, and there wasn't at that time, you're talking about 99, 98, 99. So, a blue belt was the instructor. So, very quickly, I was, getting better than the instructor. But I was more focused on Muay Thai, because at the time I didn't have respect for jiu-jitsu. I didn't really know it. I was like, oh, I'm a wrestler. I had that wrestling mentality. My company at the time transferred me out to Chicago. And I ended up meeting a kid, Billy, who I'm still friends with this day. He was like, oh, I do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I'm like, where's the gym? He's like, right across the street from your apartment. So Carlson Gracie School was there, and so I went to Carlson School for a year, and then I fell in love with jiu-jitsu. It was the first time in my life I was able to see guys that I knew I was a better athlete than, be able to stop me, be able to do things against me, and I knew that I would be able to get good at it, because if they could get good at it, I knew that I would be, even better. So I transferred back to New York. I ended up at Renzo's. And of course, Renzo's is the mecca of jiu-jitsu. And this is at a time where it was starting to get a really big push, you know what I mean? And I was lucky because I got to train at the time with Renzo when he was training, Rodrigo, who was training, Sean Alvarez, Ricardo Almeida. You know, these are some of the top guys in the world at the time. And because I was a wrestler, they all wanted me to get the feel because I was always, and even High and Renzo's brother. So I was, I was kind of the guinea pig, and I got to learn a lot. But I think the one thing that where I had my advantage, I think that's why I was so successful in the grappling world for so long, was I was one of the few wrestlers at the time who committed to jiu-jitsu. When I trained, even I went against Ricardo, and I put myself in my guard and I worked out of my guard. And I've learned how to sweep, and I learned how to do all that stuff. And that's what I think made me succeed later because I wasn't so one-dimensional. I got my black belt in 4 years. Wow. So I started training, and I fought in Abu Dhabi and did very well, and was probably one of the top grapplers on the scene at that time. It was me, maybe the only guy my weight that was better than me was maybe Munson or somebody like that. All the other guys I beat up. Me and Shanji Ribeiro used to go to war all the time, but he's still competing, and he's still multiple-time world champ. At 27, when I started thinking about doing it, I was in corporate America, but I remember when I started doing jiu-jitsu, it was like, oh, I'm doing jiu-jitsu, oh, I'm doing Muay Thai, and I'd be like, oh, we're just doing it for fun. But somewhere in the back of my head, I was like, I want to fight, And I was like, well, even though I'm putting a suit and tie on every day, I would always tell them, oh, it's just for fun. But really, I wanted to fight. And then, because I was able to progress so quickly with jiu-jitsu, and a lot of it was, like I said, I put myself in bad situations. I learned the sport. I studied the sport. I moved to Brazil, to learn jiu-jitsu, not just, learn how to defend stuff. I wanted to be able to attack people. I wanted to be able to submit people. And, when I fought, that's why I was able to submit people like I did, because I wasn't just a wrestler who was just trying to figure out how to get out of shit, I wanted to be a person that can attack just like a multiple-time world champion could in jiu-jitsu. I consider myself a pretty smart person, and I really want to master everything that I believe in technique and being very technical and learning how to outsmart people, because listen, athleticism is very important, but if I can be smarter than you and more athletic than you, then I'm going to win. I guess my whole career I was lucky to be with some of the best people in the world. From a jiu-jitsu standpoint, I was able to work with Renzo. From a boxing standpoint, I worked with Tommy Brooks and I worked with A-Roz Gist. Let me tell you, I got broke. I talk about it all the time. The first thing that I tell my guys is, I was broke in fights. I probably, when you have to understand, when I went through the fighting, then I'm very honest about things. I feel like the more honest I am and I don't hide bad things that happen to me, the better it's going to be when I train my guys. I came from a time where there really weren't fight camps. I prepared myself. So when I got into deep water sometimes, that's when that little voice in the back of your head says, were you really prepared as hard as you can? And that's what's going to push you. I fought for a title for the IFL after my 4th fight ever as a pro. I try to tell my guys this now, don't rush. You have a long career. I had to rush. My first MMA fight I was 33 years old. So, for me, it was a different situation. But, it's a completely, fighting and training in jiu-jitsu is a completely different thing. You have to be able to remember there's fights happen in 10-second interval, energy changes, where you can be winning and dominating, and then all of a sudden you hit somebody, and then they get that confidence back, and then they win that 10 seconds, and it's whoever wins those 10 seconds is who's going to win that fight, especially a close fight. And yeah, I've been broken, you know what I mean? But I know I've been broken, and the key thing is to work hard enough to not let yourself be broken again. I wanted to beat you at what you were good at. And you definitely become a different person. You can't be the easygoing nice guy when you get in there. Afterwards you shake hands and it's a job, but once that door is closed, there's no feeling. You can't explain the feeling that you have when you have to fight, because everything ends, the world stops, and it's you and that person. Even the training. When you're training, if you're fighting September 14th, it's almost like the world doesn't exist after September 14th. Everything exists before, and you don't even know what exists after. You don't know if you have a holiday. You don't know anything. None of that's important. It's almost like you're walking to death, and like you're hoping you make it through that day, But, I used to try to do some of the old samurai stuff where I literally would put my suit together, and I put it down, and I would tell my coach, if I die, this is what I want you to bury me in. And I try to go through the whole samurai mentality before I fought, because I felt like if you're as prepared as if you think that way, it's going to come out in your training. There's no worse and there's no better feeling than fighting. There's no worse feeling when you're getting ready and you're walking into that ring, and there's no better winning feeling when you win. all right? When you win, you're like, I want to do this all over again. I want to fight tomorrow if I can. But, and it's addicting, and that's why I think a lot of guys fight too long. And everyone wants me to still fight. I left on a win. I left still being competitive. I could still probably fight now. I train with my guys every day. I help my guys in New York every day. I just came back from the city helping these guys train. I give them rounds. It's just I realized there comes a point in a fighter's life where he stops competing. And I noticed when I used to compete in everything. If you put me against a marathoner, I would say I can run as hard as 7 miles, and I would try to keep up with them. We do push-ups, I try to compete with you. I noticed the last couple of years I stopped doing that. I stopped competing, I was just getting through workouts. And once that happens, I think that's time for you to end. Urge comes back all the time. Every once in a while, I'll put post up, thinking about doing another one, but you know what? That ship sailed, and I got to just put, right now what I want to do is I want to focus my energy on getting my gym and the guys that I train better. Maybe I'll do some grappling tournaments here and there. I'll do the Worlds again. And my thing is, I said I'm going to do the Worlds at the adult division, not the old man division. So maybe I'll jump back into some grappling matches, but for fighting MMA, it's done. I'm a pretty charismatic guy. I'm not as charismatic as Renzo, but that's a guy who I aspire to be as charismatic as. Super loyal. I'm almost loyal to a fault. Okay, and sometimes I trust people a little too much and maybe shouldn't be as loyal as I should be, but that's something that I was always taught from my father. My father always used to tell me, the one thing you can never sell is your name. And, because of that, I always feel like I have, I think I have really good values, and I think my students know that. I think that's why I attract a lot of people because of that. But I also have some bad faults. Sometimes I'm selfish, you know what I mean, as everyone else. And I think sometimes you have to be a little selfish when you're an athlete, and and you start to develop that kind of personality of being selfish. So I've had to learn how to stop being as selfish as I am and learn how to start to use that to help other people instead. There can be someone that talks about wanting to do things and dream about wanting to do things, but if you're not doing the everyday things that make yourself better, it's a waste of time. And what I mean by that is taking care of what's home. If you have a family, you better be taking care of your family. Taking care of your health, taking care of you as a person, and also taking care of people around you. It's very important that if you have things that are going for you, that you try to help people that aren't as beneficial as you. And so I think that's things that have changed. And I've always, I could say that my values really haven't changed much as a kid. Those values were hammered into me as a child, but the way I look at those values is a little bit different now.